Hi there, welcome to Floating in Books. This is going to be my 2024 reading year in review, and I'm going to chat to you about whether I hit my reading goal. You already know that if you saw my video last week, but also how I'm going to be tackling reading and bookish content over on the channel in 2025. So welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. In today's video, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about how my 2024 reading year went. And I actually kept track of it this time, not just on Goodreads, as I normally do, but I made myself a bullet journal. I decided to try journaling in 2024. I think I did show you in a vlog last year that I was setting up something, and I just wanted to see how I would make this work. So I've actually tried doing a bullet journal as like an agenda so that I can like keep track of my schedule. Doesn't work for me. It's a mess if I try to do that. So I also set up this where I had some general things just about life and some trackers and things like that. Ended up not using it. I used it for like a few months at the start of the year, and then I stopped doing it altogether. The only part of this little journal that I kept updating really regularly and that I thought was very useful for me was the reading journal. So I wanted to talk you through and using some of these stats to let you know what I read in 2024, what my favorite books were of the year, what genres I ended up focusing on, and whether I actually hit some of my other reading goals, say for just the number. And then we'll let you a little bit more know, and then I will tell you a little bit more about how a reading journal is going to help me track my reading in 2025 and how that's going to influence my channel as well. So yeah, I kept a reading I kept a reading journal because I was like, I don't know why, but I was pushed a lot of like bullet journaling content at the end of 2023. And I was like, you know what? I like being creative and I like doing like collages and stuff, mood boards. I love doing those kind of things. I'm not like really good at drawing or anything though. So I was like, when it comes to bullet journals, I don't know if I can make it work. So that's why I was like, you know what? For 2024, I just bought one of these journals from a local store that does them for very cheap. I think this was like €5. Most of the pages in here are lined. So it's like this. And that wasn't very helpful. The pages were also too thin to go into anything with markers and stuff, which is why I ended up doing pages like this with like just a random scrap of paper because the markers had bled into the back of the page. But in the back, there were actually like bullet pages, and those were a little bit thicker. So I was able to use my markers on that, and I just set it up based on a couple of things I had seen online, and I just decided to sort of go through it. So I ended up going with a rating page where I sort of explained how I feel, like how do I feel about a book if I give it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars. So 5-star books I only give out to books that I think was like the best book ever, that really makes me think and makes like sticks with me for a while. The more I read, like this is the 8th year running that I'm participating in the Goodreads Reading Challenge. And I majored in English, so I had to do a lot of reading for my degree. So it's not as if I haven't read a lot in my lifetime. So for me to like something enough where it's 5 stars, it really has to wow me. And for a lot of books, I'm like, yeah, this was good, but it didn't wow me. It didn't leave that impression with me as much as it used to, perhaps. So I do feel that I'm getting less and less prone to be giving out 5 stars to books, but that's a discussion for another time. 4 stars is what you do see me give out quite a bit. I had quite a few 4-star books. I'll tell you about that when we get to the end of the little journal I'm holding. So if it's just great, if I really enjoyed it, it's a 4-star read. If it's a book that I would recommend because I liked it, but that I don't think is like anything too special, it's 3 stars. But 3 stars is still a book I would recommend to friends and family or you guys. A 2-star book is a book where I'm like, I can see why people like this, but this isn't necessarily for me. And if I thought, why was this ever even published? It's a 1 star. 1 stars didn't happen for me this year, and 5 stars didn't happen for me this year, just to give you that little premise here. Then I set a little page with my reading goals. So I always set a reading goal to read 50 books, which for some people that's a lot. If you follow any online bookish content, you know this isn't a lot for a lot of people reading books online. There are people who read 200 books and they say, oh, every waking minute I try to read. I can't. I get tired. I will fall asleep if I start reading. And that happened to me quite a few months. A couple of years ago, it actually happened to me for an entire year, so I was only able to read 11 books. So 50 books for me is a achievable goal, but it is still more than what I would read if I just read without setting any goals. So I figured out around like 2014, 2015, that I could read 20 to 30 books a year quite easily. That was sort of like an easy pace for me. But I wanted to challenge myself to watch less TV and read more often. So that's why I ended up setting this goal of 50 books. It's a completely arbitrary number, but I like that it comes down to like a book per week. And that's manageable for me. I didn't exactly manage it most years that I've participated. And the only year I did get it other than this year is 2016 when I did it for the first time. And then I very deliberately actually focused on reading shorter books just so I could hit the goal. And then I actually started to focus a little bit less on quantity. I was like, you know what? If I've only read 45 books, but I still read around 18,000 pages a year, I know it's been a good reading year for me. You know, my aim is sort of like 20,000 pages a year, which I've always stayed just under it, but that's sort of like a better goal for me. It's not about the amount of books I read, it's much more about the quality that I read. I wanted to finish the Greenbone saga this year, so I always have 1 or 2 series that I would like to read or start reading, so I finished that indeed, and you'll hear me talking about that in a second. I wanted to start reading the Poppy War trilogy. I read the first book of that after I finished the Greenbone saga, and I wanted to hit 1,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel, which I also made. And bonus point, not only did I hit 1,000 subs, I also made YouTube partner on this channel because you were all watching my videos enough to be able to do that as well. And then I have a question mark for the last one because I didn't quite hit this, but my goal was also to read every day, but I just kind of read when I feel like it. After a long day at work, I don't always have the energy to be reading a lot. I teach, and reading is sometimes like it takes too much brain power for me to get into the story after a long day of teaching. I just want to veg out on the couch sometimes and watch something, and then I'll like edit a video, and that's pretty much all I can still do at the end of the day. So reading every day may not be a very feasible goal for me, but I did read a lot when I was traveling this year. So that's actually how I feel I was able to make my 50 book goal. I ended up drawing a little shelf to keep track of things, and I had a little number system where I could tick off the books once I've read them. So yes, I did read the 50 books, and as I just mentioned, I think that was because I bought an e-reader and because I went traveling quite a bit. So I don't think I will be doing as well in 2025 because I will be traveling a lot less. However, I still have the e-reader. I still use it at home. I love using it at nighttime because it just makes it so much easier to read a book in the dark rather than like trying to angle your book so the light, like whatever. So having an e-reader now has really helped me reach this goal, I feel. Also, an e-reader is a very quick way of reading a book, I have found. Like, I go through a book so much quicker on my e-reader than I do when I read it on paper. And that's been another thing that I have found doing this sort of reading challenge thing every year. The best way for me to read multiple books at the same time isn't to just have multiple books on at the same time, but they have to be different media. So I can read a paper book, an ebook, and an audiobook at the same time. I just need to make sure those storylines are very well apart. I can't read 3 fantasy stories at the same time because they'll all read the same, like they'll all seem like the same thing. And I have found with audiobooks, I really enjoy sort of, how should I say it, like nonfiction, because that's not really a storyline, so it's easier for me to pick up when I go back to it, or storylines that are incredibly simplistic. So as an audiobook, I sometimes do like to listen to a bit of rom-com or things like that, like these romantic-y kind of books. Not because, like, it's just not something that I would pick up and enjoy reading it on the page, but I do enjoy reading it when I listen to it as an audiobook. Because what I found, like when I first started listening to audiobooks, I really struggled keeping track of storylines as I was listening to it. So I don't, like, a lot of people listen to audiobooks on like top speed, which for me really doesn't work. So for me, it's like really simple stories work as audiobooks really well. But the minute it gets a bit more complicated, I really have to read it on paper. And with ebooks, I have found I can read quite a few things. I haven't really tried a nonfiction book yet on an ebook. But with ebooks, I have just found that I really race through things, and which is one of the reasons why I think during my summer vacation, I was away for 10 days, but I ended up reading 5 books in 10 days, which was like a new record for me. I hadn't read that much in that many days in years. Something I also kept track of are my yearly stats. I was only able to add it up right now. So I read 50 books in total, with August being my top reading month. I read 8 books in August, 6 in July, and 6 in October. So those were like my 3 best reading months. Pages I also kept track of. For August, it was also my best month for pages. I read 2,932 pages. In total, I've come to 17,397 pages. My worst reading book month was January, where I read 821 pages. So there's a big difference there. In total, I read across 4 different genres. I mainly read fantasy and literary fiction, but for me, literary fiction is like a whole host of things. Like detective novels I put under literary fiction, so I'm not sure if I should like make the descriptions of those genres a bit more specific so we can keep track of it better, but I think it's fine. And then I read a couple of historical fiction novels, and I read a sci-fi, so there were a couple of bits there. I read 6 books that were on my TBR, which we'll get to in a second. I bought 52 books, which is really funny because I bought 17 books in May and 16 in October. In May, I went to London and bought a lot of books there. And in October, I went to Edinburgh and bought a lot of books there. So those were the 2 months where I bought the most. But there were also plenty of months where I didn't buy a single book. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months out of the year, I didn't buy a single book. So I don't think I really necessarily have a book buying problem. I just buy a lot in one go sometimes. I listened to 11 audiobooks. I did 1 reread. And I ended up reading 12 books that are part of a series. This is how I keep track of my little genres. That's how I did that. So I had, like, I just sort of ticked how many books in that genre I read. I read 4 fantasy books in August, for instance. But Litfic I read pretty consistently throughout the year. There wasn't like a really big spike there. And I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nonfiction stories. Then I also wanted to do one of these things. This is like a tier of like that allows you to first pick your favorite book of the month, and then from like the first 3 months of the year you pick your favorite, and then the second quarter, and then you pick your favorite for every semester of the year, and then you pick your favorite book of the year. I do feel that that kind of skews like what my favorites are, because if I look at my top 10 reading list of the year, I definitely think it doesn't necessarily overlap, because sometimes I read something that I liked a little bit better at the time. So as I was going along and filling this out, I do feel that now that I look back at my entire reading year, my preferences are a little bit differently than the preferences I had in January, for instance, because I didn't know what I was going to read, of course, in the rest of the year. But my favorite book in January was The Last Devil to Die, which is by Richard Osman. Jade War by Fonda Lee was my February favorite. My March favorite was Death Masks, which is by Jim Butcher, and it's part of the Dresden series. And from that first quarter, I picked Jade War as my favorite. The second quarter, I ended up reading Cleopatra and Frankenstein in April. That was my favorite that month by Coco Mellors, but it wasn't a favorite book overall in the year, so you know. Similarly, for May, when I read the last book in the Greenbone saga, Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, and in June, I ended up reading Diane Setterfeld's Once Upon a River. And I think now, looking back on it, I think I would have picked Once Upon a River, because that's the only book I read all year where I'm still sort of like on the fence. Like, is this a 4-star read? Is it a 5-star read? Because I still think about this book. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But from these 3 books, from quarter 2, I ended up picking Jade Legacy at the time. In July, my favorite was Blue Sisters, which is another book by Coco Mellors. In August, I picked Diavola, which is Jennifer something. It's a really long name. I don't remember the author's name exactly. And in September, it was Cultish, which is a nonfiction by Amanda Montell. And from those 3, I picked Blue Sisters. Again, here I would be between Blue Sisters and Diavola, because I also really enjoyed that. Again, more about that in a second. And then in October, I picked Tender is the Flesh as my favorite book of the month. Which is also a very complicated author's name who I can't pronounce properly. In November, I picked The Untold Story, but I only read 2 books in November, so this is how I feel things get skewed a little bit. And then in December, I picked Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore as my favorite, and of those 3, I ended up picking Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore as my favorite. So in the first quarter, I picked Jade War, and in the second quarter, I picked Jade Legacy. So for the first semester, I ended up picking Jade War because I felt it was a little bit better than the last book in the series. In the third quarter, I picked Blue Sister, and in the fourth quarter, I picked Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. So I picked Blue Sisters over that. And between Jade War and Blue Sisters, I picked Blue Sisters as my favorite book of the year. And it's also on the top 10 list of the year, so if you want a spoiler, here is what the top 10 of 2024 looks like for me. So a lot of the books I just mentioned are on this list, but because of the tier system, some of the books that I also really enjoyed didn't really make it into the tier list, because I sometimes read multiple books that I really loved in a single month, and then I had to pick because of the tier list. So that's why some of the books that I'm mentioning as part of my top 10 aren't part of the tier list that I just showed you. So Diavola, which is a ghost story, it's about a dysfunctional family from New York, I believe, who ends up going on a vacation to the Italian countryside in Tuscany, and their daughter, who is our main character, is sort of like the black sheep of the family, and something happens in that house. It's a really good ghost story at the same time. It feels like a modern ghost story. It was really well done, and I really enjoyed that one. It's one of the better books I read all year. I already mentioned Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield here. Lovely story. As I mentioned, this could have been 5 stars, and I've given it 4 stars, and I've gone back and forth between giving it 4 and 5 stars. This is a historical fiction novel where a stranger takes a little girl into a tavern right around Christmas time, I believe, at the end of the 19th century, and the stranger collapses and the little girl seems dead but comes back alive. And it's about these people who are in the tavern at the moment this happens, but also the storytelling that happens as the story spreads around in this little town that is really close to the start of the Thames River. So it's not located in London, but a little further upstream. And this little girl, and it seems to be like the missing child of a couple who lives really nearby, and there's this whole thing going on. It ended up being really intricate in its storytelling. There's a link to old folk stories and like local mythology almost, which I found really enjoyable. The only thing that makes it not 5 stars for me is because some of the plot points seemed a little easy. So what I mean by that is like there's a romance subplot, which is very obvious. There was like the girl who then seems to be like this long lost daughter. Of course, we know she's not this long lost daughter, but who she actually is never really fully figured out. So there were subplots that did contribute to like the overarching storyline, but I felt that that sort of link wasn't always well crafted. So that's the only thing where I'm like, if that had been better, like if all those puzzle pieces had fit together a lot nicer, then I think I would have liked it better. And right now it was like, it just felt like it was there because it was convenient for the plot and it wasn't driving the plot forward. I hope I'm making sense. Then Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. If you saw my video last week that I filmed in the same outfit at the same time, because I'm filming them back to back, you heard me say how much I enjoyed this story. This is such a good combination of nerdiness, a bookstore, and a secret society. It's all what I needed. I thought the characters were really witty. This ends up being this book is about a main character who loses his job and then accepts a job at this 24-hour bookstore that we very quickly find out isn't just a bookstore. There are codes, there's Google, there's computers, there's systems, there's a secret society that gets involved somehow, and a whole host of characters with their own little quirks and twists and turns. So I thought this was very, very well done. Another book that I couldn't pick as a favorite in my tier list, but there was just something else I had to pick. But it's A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. I really enjoyed it. I read it in like October, November-ish, like right around that time. And I really enjoy T. Kingfisher as a storyteller. This is the second book by her that I've read, and I really enjoy them. They feel like dark fairy tale retellings. So the baseline of the story is very much a fairy tale, but at the same time, it feels new and fresh and a little differently from what you might expect normally from a fairy tale. Here we follow a mom and daughter duo. The daughter is very heavily controlled by the mother, who is a sorceress, and this girl is trying to break free. The mother, at the same time, is trying to marry herself off to a well-off man, a nobleman, and the daughter starts to plot sort of her mother's demise, you could say. So a very enjoyable story indeed. But another book I read in the same month is Tender is the Flesh, and that one I really enjoyed. The author has a bit of a complicated name, so I don't want to butcher it, but I'll make sure to have it in the description box down below. This is essentially a horror story, and at the same time it's a social critique of how we deal with the climate and animals and stuff like that. So what happens in this story, we follow this man and his perspective in the world he lives in. And in this world, all animals have died due to some sort of disease. And instead of animals, humans now eat humans. Humans that are specifically bred for the purpose of being eaten. And he works in a slaughterhouse where these humans are killed, which is done in a very similar fashion to how most cattle is killed at slaughterhouses currently. So if you have a weak stomach, if you don't like blood, this is not going to be for you. This man has so many regrets, and we follow everything through his eyes, and he's sort of like trying to figure out, like, are we doing the right thing? And he doesn't always want to eat human beings, but at the same time, he's also like just influenced by the world he is living in, and that's sort of like also another takeaway from the story. So, important story. Is it enjoyable? If you don't like dark things, you're not going to like this. Let me tell you that. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well crafted. And it's finally a book with a plot twist that I didn't see coming. Then I read Estee Gibson's A Dowry of Blood. And I think I read this in August when I also read Diavola. So this was sort of like it was a Dracula retelling. That's the way I have to explain it to you. If you are familiar with vampire Dracula-esque stories, we of course now have the new Nosferatu film, which I would like to see at some point. But A Dowry of Blood is essentially a Dracula retelling from the POV from one of the other characters. One of his brides, you could say. So yeah, this was enjoyable. It was a very fun romp. It was good to get the other perspective. I didn't give it 5 stars because it's just not an original story. It's leaning very heavily on the original storytelling, and because it leans so heavily on that, I feel we don't get a lot of the interesting things that you could have put into this story to make it, like, to really take it to a higher level. So I enjoyed this one a lot. I love a good vampire novel. We all know that. So I really enjoyed that. Speaking of vampire novels, I also read Silver Under Nightfall by Rinchu Pecco. I think that's how you pronounce the name. And this was really enjoyable. This is essentially about a vampire hunter who understands that vampires also have needs. And there are these different kingdoms and like vampire realms. And the question is he part vampire or not? And his mother is involved somehow. This was excellent. I believe it's part of a series. I don't know when the next book is going to come out. Could already be out. But yeah, if there's any more in this series, I'm going to read it because it was excellent. It had politics. It had a very well-crafted world. It had friendships. It had so many things that I thought were very well done that I really enjoyed. And it's sort of like The Witcher meets vampires. That's how I felt about this story. Then I read Blue Sisters. This is the book that came out on top on my tier list that I just shared with you. This was by Coco Mellers, and I read 2 of her books this year. The first one, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, I was like, but it was gifted Blue Sisters for my birthday by my neighbors, and I was like, might as well read it ASAP. It was a very, very enjoyable story. It is about 4 sisters who all have their own sort of identity and crises that they have to deal with. But one of them has passed away. And these 3 sisters who are left are all dealing with the grief of missing this sister in their own way. And it's about how they interact with each other, how they interact with their parents. It's very, very much focused on family, and it has all these flashbacks to when they first moved into their New York apartment. And a lot of the story comes to life because the parents want to sell this apartment. But the sister who passed away lived there with another sister, and they're like trying to pack up her things and trying to move out. And that's when all the memories come to the forefront. So it's a sad story for sure, but it was beautifully written, and I really enjoyed all 4 of the sisters and what we got to see from their characteristics. So this was a very enjoyable one indeed. So I'm not mad that it came out on top as, you know, part of the tier list I just shared, but that was a good one. And then I have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is one I read on vacation as an ebook. I do have the physical copy at home though. But this was really enjoyable. It's by V.E. Schwab, which, again, she is an author I've read multiple things by that I've always enjoyed, so really enjoy that. And this is about a woman who doesn't age and she doesn't die. So she runs into the woods on her wedding night, completely upset. She doesn't want to do it, and she makes a deal with a spirit who ends up being like a devil-ish kind of character. And everybody's like, you know, you have to be careful what you wish for. And I don't know exactly anymore what she wishes for, but she definitely is trying to like be smart about it in a way, you could say. And every single year or every couple of years, this spirit visits her again to see how she's doing. She's living all of these different lifetimes. She has to become incredibly wise. She needs to earn money some way or other. But the caveat with her is that the minute she walks out of a room, people forget who she is. So she can interact with people, but if they wake up in the morning, they no longer know who she is. So she has to, like, she cannot connect with another human being, which makes her life incredibly difficult. This was beautiful, and I thought the time travel elements and the flashbacks were well done. I really liked her as a character. She really, really grows up really fast because of the situation. And there is like a contemporary part to the plot which is like happening now, you could say, where she does meet someone who, for the first time in her life, doesn't forget about her. And then she sort of figures out what the meaning of that is, and then everything spirals there. Apparently there is no follow-up going to happen to this book, which is a bit of a shame, but this has happened with V.E. Schwab before, that there was not going to be a second book to Vicious, and then we did get a second book to Vicious, so maybe it's going to happen someday, because this book has such an open ending that it very easily could continue somehow. And finally, and this was a bit of a surprise to me, but I didn't want to put any of my rereads or books that were part of series that I gave 4 stars as part of my end of year favorites list, because then you need to like read several books until you get there. So I was like, you know what, that's not going to be very helpful. So I did select Daughter of the Pirate King. I did read the second book in this series, which I didn't like at all because it felt far too tropey. And that is the case for this first one as well. But I was able to finish this in one sitting. It was such a fun time. And for that, I gave it 4 stars. It was just incredibly entertaining. It's Pirates of the Caribbean meets feminism, because our main character is the daughter of the Pirate King, and she has been tasked to find secrets on a ship. So she has herself being captured by this enemy pirate ship to find the secrets for her dad. It's daughter-father dynamics. There is a bit of romance involved. And she's a partly siren at the same time. So this was interesting. This was very entertaining, and that's what I liked it for. But when I revisited the series with the second story, I was like, I don't think I want to continue it, because it was just a lot of the same thing yet again. Action-packed, yes. Enjoyable, very much, but not something I need to go back to. So that was my top 10 list, and of course I filtered it out from the list of all the books that I was reading and all that. So I was doing that. I started off writing little reviews in this thing as well, but I ended up running out of space a lot, so stopped doing that at some point. So that's something I want to do better next year. This was really helpful. I set myself the 24 books I wanted to read in 2024. Ended up reading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these books. So a little bit like a TBR, but not quite. I still haven't read all of these. Some of them I want to get to a little bit more quickly than others. But it just gave me a purpose. Like whenever I was like, what do I want to read next? And if I had no idea what I wanted to read next, I would just go to my little list that I designed to look like a bit like a bookshelf, and I would pick one. So what I ended up reading from this list is The Last Devil to Die, The Dark Archive, which is from the Invisible Library series. I wanted to reread Rivers of London, Death Masks by Jim Butcher, Silver Under Nightfall, which was in my top 10, Jade War, which is the continuation of the Greenbone saga that I wanted to finish, Vele Hemels Boven de Zevende. I also wanted to make sure I read at least a couple of Dutch books this year. Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia, I finally read. Piranesi, I finally got around to, and I finally got started with the Poppy War. Then I also kept track of the books I bought, which, again, I need to set it up differently. And then we get to sort of like the end of year stuff. So I already mentioned, I read 17,397 pages. 20% of what I read was by male authors, the other 80% by female authors. Then when it comes to genres, I read mostly lit fic and only a sliver of sci-fi and historical fiction, a little bit of nonfiction, and then the other part was made up by fantasy. And finally, I gave 5 stars and 1 stars to no books at all. But 32% of all the books I read were 4-star reads. 50% of what I read were 3-star reads, and 18% of what I read was 2-star reads. So in numbers, that's 9 books that got a 2-star rating from me, 25 books that got a 3-star rating, and 16 books that got a 4-star rating. So overall, I think I did a good job. Like, I think that 2024 was one of the more successful reading years of my lifetime, not just with the amount of reading I did, but also just quality-wise, because even though there were no 5-star reads for me, I think reading 16 out of 50 books that are such great stories for you is still a really good number. So I'm very happy with the quality of what I read. And I read close to 18,000 pages, which is sort of like average for me. Even if I didn't hit my 50-book reading goal certain years, I still read somewhere around 80 18,000 pages. So that's sort of like my standard. I wish I could hit 20,000 one year, but I don't think that's going to happen unless I like retire or something like that. But that brings me to 2025 and the things I want to do then. So for 2025, I do want to continue a 50 book reading challenge. That's just what works for me. I have already started 2 books. Well, I still need to start them, but I know what books are going to be the first 2, these 2. So I promised myself if I would hit my 50 book reading goal, that this would be the book I would read during my Christmas break from work. This is Sarah J. Maas's House of Earth and Blood. This is part of the Crescent City series. I haven't read Sarah J. Maas in years, and I've heard great things. This is her adult novel. I read the Throne of Glass series, liked it. ACOTAR, not much of a fan of that, but I can see why people like it. But this is apparently more urban fantasy-esque, and I just really like the blurb of it. But this is a behemoth of a book. This is 800 pages. So I knew that I would have to read that when I could really like dig into it when it's like dark and dreary outside. So that's why I'm going to read that next. And then this book was actually released in Dutch this year, so I heard a lot of really good reviews for it. I actually bought mine a couple of years ago. It's a nonfiction story called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. And I hoped that I could like listen to it on audio, because my favorite way, like my favorite thing to listen to on audiobooks is nonfiction. But that's not going to happen. So it's about the lives of the 5 women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. So I just thought this could be another thing I can read in my Christmas break. So the first week of Christmas break, the second week of Christmas break. That's sort of how it works in my brain. I can read a little bit every day, I think. So those should be fine for the first 2 weeks. And then I can like tick them off. And something that I will be doing in 2025 is that I'm going to take the reading journal part of what I just talked you through, and I'm actually going to make that my bullet journal of the year. So I'm just going to make a reading journal where I'm going to keep track of reading, where I can do reviews on the page and like do a bit of junk journaling, because I love a bit of junk journaling, and like do a page per book. And I thought that that could be part of my wrap-ups. So rather than just telling you how I feel about the book, I can like get crafty and like build the page together with you guys while you're looking at me doing it, and I can tell you about the book at the same time. That was the plan, to do it that way. So to just like sit down maybe once a month or once every 6 to 8 weeks to like sit down and craft a couple of these pages and just have a bit of fun and like fill out the little trackers with you guys. That's how I think I want to style my wrap-ups from now on. I'm going to be setting up my reading journal very, very soon. I should be getting some supplies in later today. And then over the Christmas break period, I'm going to be setting everything up. So I'm all set and ready to go in January. So you will see then what I turn it into, because I have so many ideas for this thing. So I hope I can keep that going. Maybe I'll still do like a chatty version like this. If I don't have time to like get really crafty, and maybe I don't want to film it all the time. But I just thought that that could be a nice twist on letting you know about the books I read. So thank you so very much for joining me here today. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on my 2024 reading year and what you can expect from me bookish wise in 2025. I hope you're here for it. I will be doing other content as well. The fashion content isn't going anywhere, nor is the vlog idea going anywhere as well. I'm still going to be keeping those, and as I already mentioned at the start of the video, I can only do so many bookish videos in a year because it's tied to how much I read, and I can't always read as much as I'd like. So there's that. So yeah, I hope you're still here for it. Thumbs up this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more by me, and I will be back with a new video next week. Bye bye.